Everyone thought The Forge was the game that would finally break Roblox out of its brain rot era. It came out of nowhere, took over the front page, and stayed there with hundreds of thousands of people playing at once. And for a minute, it felt like the platform was actually shifting toward high-quality content again. People talked about it like it was untouchable, but that momentum didn't last. A few months later, the player count has cratered, and the game is essentially a ghost town. It's one of the fastest crashes I've seen on the platform in a long time. So, how does a game go from being the savior of Roblox to a complete afterthought in 8 weeks? I wanted to look into the timeline to see where it all went wrong. But before we begin, subscribe to help me hit 50k subs. I'd really appreciate it. And yeah, let's begin. For anyone who hasn't played or seen it, the whole game is built around a pretty basic hook. You're going into caves to mine for better materials so you can craft stronger gear and survive tougher fights. It's that classic progression where you're always just one upgrade away from feeling powerful. To be real with you, I was actually a big fan of this game. I spent a lot of time on it because the way you progress through the armor sets and defenses felt rewarding. Even with the state it's in now, the actual gameplay is still great, which is why it's so frustrating to see where it ended up. The timing of this release was huge because Roblox was honestly in the gutter. The front page was just a sea of that brain rot garbage, low-effort mass-produced clones that all felt exactly the same. It was probably the worst I've ever seen the charts look. Then The Forge came out, and it felt like a breath of fresh air. It wasn't trying to be a cheap copy of whatever was trending. It actually had a soul and a gameplay hook that felt original. People were so desperate for something real that they flocked to it instantly. The hype was so real that by the start of December, the game was pulling 1 million concurrent players. On a platform usually dominated by mindless simulators, seeing a unique project hit those numbers was insane. Usually, you only see those kinds of numbers on games designed to bait kids with bright colors and zero substance. So, for a game with actual depth to hit 7 figures felt like a revolution. It felt like a message to every developer on the platform that effort actually pays off. The hype was everywhere. You couldn't open YouTube or TikTok without seeing massive creators trying it out, doing challenges or a guide on how to min-max your armor. It genuinely felt like the start of a renaissance for Roblox, where the high-effort projects would finally kick the low-quality clones off the front page for good. But looking back, that million-player peak might have been the worst thing to happen to the game. It set an impossible standard, because the excitement stayed white-hot for about 2 weeks, and then, the cracks started to show, the player count started to bleed out, and once that initial new game smell wore off, people realized that keeping 1 million people entertained is a lot harder than getting them through the door. The bigger the game got, the harder it was to ignore the technical problems. The servers were basically getting overrun by bots and hackers, which made it difficult to join a single normal server.
This game has no trading, this game has no gifting. But you know what you can do? Sell the account itself. I went over onto eBay and searched up The Forge Roblox, and as you guys can see, there is people selling accounts with the Angel Race, with the Magma Pickaxe. And these guys are selling it for like $20, $30, like actually insane prices. And this is just on eBay. There's probably other sites that I've never heard of, and there's probably way more people farming and bot farming just like this on these sites.
It was a huge topic of conversation, and plenty of people were talking about it, even making videos just to show how broken the situation had actually become. But the real issue was the way the game was designed. When you first start, it's great. You're constantly hitting new milestones and upgrading your gear. You can put in a few solid sessions and feel like you're actually getting somewhere. But then, the progression eventually just hits a wall. That fast-paced flow disappears and turns into a massive repetitive grind. At first, you're getting simple tasks like killing 5 zombies, but as you progress, it gets atrocious. The requirements jump to things like killing 500 zombies or mining 1,000 rocks. It becomes incredibly repetitive, and you're forced to do the same tasks for way too long just to see any real progress. Once people realized the early game excitement was over and they were stuck in a loop that didn't go anywhere, they just stopped logging in, and I'm one of them. Boredom started to set in pretty quickly across the community. The core problem was that the game just didn't have enough content to back up its own hype. At the time, you basically just had World 1 and World 2. Once the average player pushed through those areas and hit the cap, they realized there was absolutely nothing left to do. Everyone was sitting around waiting for World 3. But the release date felt like it was moving further and further away. And to be honest, I don't think you can pin this 100% on the developers, because developing a massive world takes time, and they probably weren't prepared for 1 million people to finish their game in a weekend. But that's the brutal reality of Roblox. When you have a game that's blowing up that fast, then you were literally on a ticking clock. Because a lot of people are used to how other brain rot games stay relevant, like Steal a Brain Rot or Grow a Garden, where the developers are constantly in the servers doing admin abuse events or crazy stuff just to keep the engagement high. People have almost been trained to expect that kind of constant chaos to stay interested. And The Forge didn't really have any of that. It tried to be a more traditional, serious game. But without those constant gimmicks or major weekly updates, the audience just got bored. If you aren't giving people a reason to log back in every few days, they're going to find something else to play. Without that constant stream of new content to distract from the grind, the player count just didn't have a chance. The lack of meaningful content is still a massive problem for the game even now. If you look at the community hubs, people are genuinely frustrated. Just recently, someone pointed out that they've been sitting around waiting for the Island 4 update with zero communication on when it's actually dropping. Instead of new areas or mechanics, the devs are just throwing out things like re-rolls and mining boosts to try and keep people quiet. But players see right through it. They know those are just band-aids to distract from the fact that there's no actual game to play. It's a tough situation because the developers might be putting in a ton of hours behind the scenes, but the output just isn't matching the scale of the game's success. When you have a massive audience, boring updates or small stat tweaks don't cut it anymore. People started losing patience because they wanted new challenges, not just a slightly faster way to do the same old grind. To be honest, I hit that same wall myself. I put a lot of time into this game and I really wanted it to succeed, but eventually, I just ran out of things to do, and I just stopped logging in. On top of the lack of updates, there's a much deeper flaw in how the game actually functions, and that's the brutal RNG system. For anyone who doesn't know, RNG is just the game's way of using random chance to decide your fate. In The Forge, the whole progression relies on you grinding for rare ores for hours, only to throw them into a crafting system where nothing is guaranteed. It's basically a massive gamble with your time. You could spend all day collecting materials, hit the forge button, and have the game hand you a piece of junk instead of the high-tier gear you actually needed. And because you lose all those resources regardless of the outcome, a bad roll means you're right back at square one with nothing to show for your work. I've seen how soul-crushing this gets for players. I remember watching a video of someone trying to craft a set of frog armor. It's not even the best in the game, and it took him 3 actual days of constant effort just because his luck was that terrible. I've had that same experience myself. I remember grinding for about 7 hours straight, just focusing on getting a good armor. I did the work, gathered the materials, and when it finally came time to craft it, the game gave me the stuff I already had. Just like that, 7 hours of my life were gone with zero progress. When a game makes it possible for an entire afternoon of effort to result in absolutely nothing, it's only a matter of time before people decide it's just not worth the headache. The combination of the bots, the constant hacking, and that repetitive gameplay loop really started to tear the game apart. When you pile the lack of updates on top of all that, it's no surprise the cracks were showing. But honestly, things took a turn for the worse when the community's frustration shifted directly toward the developers. People were starting to get really mad, and the main reason for the blowout was how the devs handled or didn't handle the massive wave of hackers filling up the servers. These bots were not just a minor nuisance, they were a platform-wide problem that was actively ruining the experience for everyone who was trying to play the game legitimately. Instead of the developers being seen as the heroes who brought something original to Roblox, they started being viewed as the people who let their own creation fall into chaos. The way the developers decided to handle the hacker situation was probably the biggest mistake they made. Their solution was to introduce private servers. Usually, that's exactly what players want, and at first, everyone was actually hyped about it. If you're getting harassed by bots and hackers in every public lobby, a private space sounds like the perfect fix. But that excitement turned into pure frustration the second people saw the price tag. The developers set the price at 100 Robux a month. Now, 100 Robux might not sound like a fortune to everyone, but when you consider that private servers expire in a month and were the only way to escape the game-breaking hackers, it felt like the devs were taking advantage of the situation by making private servers cost 100 Robux. The players were basically paying a safety tax just to enjoy the game, and people were rightfully furious. It came off as incredibly greedy because there was no reason to set the price that high. They could have made them free to help the community out, or even just a nominal fee like 10 Robux. But they chose 100. It sent a message that the developers were more interested in profiting off the hacker problem than actually fixing it. That was a huge turning point where a lot of the respect the community had for the devs just evaporated, and people started turning on the game entirely. It's honestly depressing to look back on because this game actually had potential. It wasn't just another generic clone, but the relationship between the devs and the players got so toxic that people who actually liked the game started praying for its downfall. You'd see posts all over the place from players saying stuff like, "I'm not a hater, but I genuinely hope this game fails." That's a wild thing to say about a game you supposedly enjoy, but the frustration was real. They felt like the developers were just refusing to balance anything. The quests were a nightmare, the pickaxes were overpriced, and the runes weren't worth the effort. Even if you stacked every single luck totem and potion in the game, the legendary drops still felt impossible to get. It felt like the game was actively fighting against you. The worst part, though, was the attitude of the developers. Instead of taking the feedback and fixing the balancing issues, they basically banned anyone who had something critical to say. It's really just a death sentence for a Roblox game when the people making it stop listening to the people playing it. The Forge ended up losing the one thing that made it special in the first place. It transformed from this fresh, exciting experience into a miserable, expensive grind that felt more like a chore than a hobby. By the time they realized they were losing everyone, the community had already checked out mentally. It's a perfect example of how a great idea can be completely killed by bad management and a lack of respect for the player's time. Every time the devs actually added something new, the reaction wasn't even hype anymore, it was just exhaustion. You already knew that seeing a new piece of gear meant you were about to sign your life away to a screen for days. There was zero skill involved, it was literally just a contest of who could leave their game open the longest. To get those top-tier armors or the rarest ores, the only real strategy was to just not play the game. You had to set up an AFK spot and stay there while you were asleep, all for a tiny chance at a decent roll. I spent most of my time doing exactly that. I'd look at my setup and realize I was spending way more time away from the keyboard than actually moving my character around. That's the biggest sign that a game is cooked, when the only way to get anywhere is leaving your computer on for 12 hours straight while you go do something else. It's not even entertainment anymore. The game just became a background process for my PC. And that's when I and basically everyone else finally just quit. I found this one guy who spent an entire week, 7 actual days, grinding for super rare ores like Suriafall, Iheriolite, and Void Stars. He finally went to forge his gear, mentally prepared to accept basically any sword. But the RNG screwed him so hard he ended up with a 14% dagger instead. Imagine spending a week of your life on one goal, only to get hit with the worst possible outcome that you had no way of avoiding. He basically said it was like getting hit with cold water, and it opened his eyes to how pathetic the game had become. He quit right then and there, telling everyone else to leave before they wasted their time too. When your players are actively warning others to stay away because the game feels like a complete waste of time, you've lost the plot. The Forge had all the potential in the world to be a top-tier Roblox title, but between the overpriced private servers, the lack of updates, and a progression system that rewards a week of work with a 14% dagger, it's no wonder the game is dying. It turned from a fun discovery into a job that doesn't pay, and honestly, life is too short to spend it AFK grinding for a game that doesn't respect you. The tragedy is that The Forge wasn't even a bad game, it was actually a high-quality experience. But it didn't align with what the Roblox community wanted to play, and instead of listening, the developers stayed stubborn. They refused to balance the mechanics or make the progression any easier. When they actually did something, it was usually just a tiny meaningless fix that didn't address the real problems. Ignoring the players is exactly why the game lost thousands of people. If you look at the player count charts today, the decline is brutal. It hit a massive peak and has done nothing but drop ever since, reaching the lowest levels since the day it launched. At its peak, this game was reaching 1 million players and consistently averaging over 400,000 people online. And now the highest it has even touched in the last 7 days is 27,000. That is a massive drop-off for a game that was the biggest thing on the platform just a couple of months ago. It is honestly just another example of a game that failed because it couldn't keep people entertained. The potential was there, but the way the developers handled everything ruined it. Even though you can't put 100% of the blame on them, but the way they responded to issues and treated their most dedicated fans, the people actually putting in the hours, is what ultimately killed the momentum. When you ignore the people who care about your game the most, you can't be surprised when they finally decide to walk away. I'd love to see a world where the devs actually pull their heads out of the sand and pull off a massive comeback. We've seen games like Fish do it, where they actually listen and turn the ship around, but I'm not too sure about what's happening here. The fatigue is just too real. Once you lose the community's trust, you can't just patch that back in. I reached my breaking point during the late game grind. There's a specific kind of frustration that comes from pouring hours into a session only to realize you've made zero progress, when the game stops feeling like a reward and starts feeling like a second job that doesn't pay. And the worst part is seeing what this did to the platform. For a second, it felt like we were finally moving toward high-quality, original games, but instead we've just regressed. Since the big games are falling off, the front page is back to being a graveyard of mass-produced brain rot. We're stuck with low-effort shit again like Escape Tsunami for brain rot and its clones, that are just designed to farm as many players possible. It's a massive letdown because we had a chance for something better, and now we're just back to the same old cycle of brain rot. I really hope we see more people try what the team behind The Forge did. They dropped a unique game right when Roblox felt pretty stale, and it actually worked. People stopped what they were doing and paid attention. It wasn't just some cheap, lazy game made to trick kids for clicks. You could tell they actually tried, which is pretty obvious. I mean, even if the player count didn't stay high forever, it showed that we're all tired of the same old brain rot games. We want stuff that's actually fun and well made. Maybe the devs will fix the bugs and get it back to the front page, or maybe this will inspire someone else to drop something even better. Anyways, tell me what you guys think about all this. Did you actually enjoy playing it, or did the hype die out too fast for you? Let me know in the comments. Also, I'm trying to hit 50,000 subscribers. If you're enjoying the videos, hitting that subscribe button helps out a ton. But anyway, that's all I've got for today. Hope you guys have a good one, and I'll see you in the next one.